Welcome back to the channel. Chris Morrison, Gulf Side Ministries, and back with us again, Tim Nichols. We have long ago stopped counting which installment that we're on, but I know that we are in Hebrews chapter 11 today, right?
Yes, we are.
Very good. So I know you've been excited
About
to get
that
to
minute.
this passage, as I have been as well. So this is what I want you. Let's just jump right into things. But let me start with just asking to kind of contextualize things for us, because Hebrews 11 is one of those passages to me, Tim, sort of like First Corinthians 13, the famous love passage. People do the love passage, right? And they don't bother wondering how that fits into in that case, 12 to 14 unit. So the Hall of Faith in chapter 11, wonderful passage, amazing passage. We're going to get to define faith, all those sorts of things. Can you put this in context for us, though, as we get started?
Yeah, so the immediate, and yeah, this is like 11:1 is one of those verses that you can find embroidered on throw pillows at your local Jesus junk store, and 11:6 as well, and like a lot of whole sermon series, and I've done this too. So I'm like, as I point my finger, I've got three bony fingers
That's
pointing back
right.
at me.
Me too, right?
You
Have a
can
mirror moment. We
do
talk about
an
this.
entire sermon series out of Hebrews 11 and just go back into each story and then like knit them together in terms
Mm-hmm.
of what Hebrews 11 is doing. And it's like I have no regrets about having done that sermon series. It's a great
Mm-hmm.
series to do, but you don't really learn what Hebrews is about doing it.
Right.
You learn what Hebrews 11 is about, but that's happening in a context where 10 chapters preceding.
Right.
The immediate occasion for this excursus on faith, for us going where we're going here, is the last few verses of chapter 10, where having given a dire warning
Mm-hmm.
that you, like under Moses, if you defied God's law, you would find yourself dying by stoning.
Right.
And what do you think's going to happen if you have defied a greater than Moses?
Right.
How do you think that's going to go?
Right.
And then he or the authors immediately then have a note of encouragement, having said, let it yet a little while he who is coming will come and will not tarry. Now the just will live by faith, but if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are
I'm just going to
not
pull
of
it
the,
so we can see it.
yeah,
So here you're down here in verse. I'm just going to it. So
yep.
verse
Right.
39, right?
But we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who
Mm-hmm.
believe to the saving of the soul. And then we're immediately going, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, which is coming off of verse 38. The just will live by faith.
And this, so
Uh,
this is one of the places where the chapter breaks can sometimes get us in trouble. I mean, for
oh
him, this is
gosh,
all a
yes.
unified thought.
Hmm. Yeah, and there are shifts in thought. I just realized I'm not plugged in. And I'm going to run out of power. There are shifts in thought that happen in the book. There are places where if you're inclined to put in chapter breaks, they could go, right?
Right.
But they're not original, and
Right.
it's never a bad idea to back up a few verses. And like,
Right. And
what,
find
what
out.
what was the occasion for this starting?
Right. A good hermeneutical rule of thumb is find out what's the argument that the author is making, and how does this passage we're in contribute to the argument, especially when you're like a chapter break, because it may not it's probably not a totally brand new subject. He's probably building off something he said previously.
Yes. And what he's laid before, I mean, all the way from the beginning of the book, what he has laid before his readers is God has shown us something now that the fathers really wanted to see.
Mm-hmm.
In these
Right.
last days, he's spoken to us by his son, who is far greater than the angels who mediated the law, who is far greater than Moses, who
Mm-hmm.
brought the law to us, who was more faithful than Moses ever was,
Mm.
who was more faithful as we should be more faithful, and we should be more faithful following Christ than the Exodus generation was following Moses. That did
Right.
not work out well for them. What do we expect? um,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then moves into Christ's priesthood and challenging them to face the priesthood that what Christ has done for them, and then is calling them into, as it will turn out. So we have a whole deep dive into what, I mean, this is one of into the Melchizedek passage, which is one of those little Old Testament passages.
Right.
This is one of those places where if you ever wonder, like, is it really okay for me to do a deep dive on this obscure little Old Testament story? I mean,
Yeah.
the Holy Spirit did.
Yeah. Go for it. Right.
As it turns out, this is stuff that rewards deep dives.
Yeah.
So we have this
Little
whole
nuggets
deep
that are in
dive
there.
on Melchizedek and how Jesus, because he's a priest after the order of Melchizedek, is superior to the whole Levitical priesthood and inaugurates, in fact, a new priestly service. And he's our forerunner, which means by implication, we are part of that priestly service, which is now being offered in heaven, not in some earthly tabernacle. And then he begins to talk about how it was never possible the blood of bulls and goats could never take away sin. Like sacrifice for sin no longer remains. Where there's remission of sins from another source, from a superior source, blood of Jesus, there is no more sacrifice. And so you can't, there's nothing to return to there. If we go back to
Yeah, and
that,
I like how you put that on a positive spin. A lot of people, you talked about this pretty emphatically a couple of times ago, that a lot of people put that where there's no sacrifice for sin. They read that and threatening, and you're like, no, no, that's gospel. There's nothing else. That's it. That's what we have.
yeah, chapter 10 says that twice, and everybody knows it's good news the first time.
Right.
And then you hang if we sin willfully in front of it, and everybody's like, oh no, there's no sacrifice for sin. Yeah, no kidding. The veil was torn in half. There's no sacrifice for sin. It's over.
Right.
So you can go back to that, but to put it in modern terms, you can go back to that, but you're just LARPing at this point. It's not real.
Yeah, I remember that.
You can't
Right.
really do that.
Right.
So what are we to do then if we're part of these people? And he reminds them, end of chapter 10. This is hugely important because there's a lot of preaching on Hebrews where they correctly acknowledge the message of perseverance and then talk as though these people are lightweights who
Yeah.
are just in danger of being blown away.
Right.
And end of chapter 10, starting in verse 32, he reminds them of all that they've gone through. And I dare say most of the preachers who preach like this book is written to spiritual lightweights could not say that they've been through what these people have been through. There's a huge, they have been persecuted. They have had, their houses and their bank accounts confiscated. They've been plundered. They've been made a spectacle. So like publicly shamed,
Right.
And they have endured all of that confidently. The whole like 35, do not cast away your confidence. You can't say that to someone who never had any.
Right.
They have handled all of that confidently. End of verse 34, knowing that you have a better and an enduring possession for yourselves in heaven. So just hang on.
Right. Keep doing what you're doing.
Just keep doing what you're doing. Just hang on. And faith is very much, of the essence. Like that's what we need, right? If we're gonna hang on, we have to have faith.
Right.
The just will live by faith, straight out of Habakkuk, where it's talk about being saved alive through tribulation, through physical tribulation. And so now coming into 11, we are going to take up the subject of faith and begin to encourage these believers that they're not alone.
Excellent. See, that's the kind of context of how 11:1, like why suddenly talk about the hall of faith? Because these people have been living a life of faith. They need to endure in this faith, and there's a great reward for this enduring faith. So let's talk about what this faith is. And
well, funny you should ask.
Yeah. So what does it look like?
So the first statement, and this is one of those throw pillow verses,
right?
Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And everybody wants to like wildly theologize this or just kind of say it and not really deal with what it means.
Mm-hmm.
A mentor of mine took me to this verse once, and we were sitting on a picnic table outside, and he says, Tim, put away all your theology for a second and just answer some questions about the words here. What's a
Okay.
substance? Like stuff.
Yeah.
And he goes, yes, exactly. He knocks on the picnic table and goes, something
Right.
something right here. It's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the substance of things hoped for. What's evidence, Tim? Well, it's how I know something is true, right?
Mm-hmm.
The evidence of things not seen. So the right here, present, tangible reality of a thing that I hope for, the way that we know that a thing that's not visible yet, the way that we know that that's true, that's what faith is.
Nice.
And in this way, the elders obtained a good testimony. This is practicing this is how, and then the whole rest of the chapter falls out of this.
So
By
I know
faith, we
that.
understand. Oh, go
No,
ahead.
hang on. I know that we're not supposed to theologize 1 and 2, but I don't want to let that extremely practical kind of bottom line. This is can you say a little more about, maybe put that, we're using this concrete term, like you're knocking on a table. So if that's what faith is, this is the thing, this faith, this is the thing that this is how I know what I hope for is true. But put that practical for me. Like, what does that look like for
Okay.
somebody in the trenches of ministry, in the trenches of daily life?
I was talking with someone earlier this week, who a daughter in the faith of mine, um, who was, and we were kind of talking through how she might induce someone to grasp that God really loves them, that God really forgives them, that God is how we know God the Father to be toward us. Like, how do we get this person around that corner to really see God the Father the way that God the Father is? And I challenged her, like, how did you get around that corner? And one of the things that came out of that conversation is, like, I helped her get around that corner. And the way that I did it was by treating her in the way that God treats her. By, like, not being like, if there's sin to be dealt with, we're going to elicit the confession. We're going to pronounce the absolution. We're going to, you're clean now. Get in front of the mirror and say so. Look yourself in the eye and say, I am clean, which is physically hard, by the way, if you've never done it.
Right. Yes.
It is really hard to make, but we'll walk through. And I just referred back to some of those things that we'd done. And the point I was making was not, gosh, what a great guy I am, but it is by doing these things that, and God built us to work this way. Someone treats us in this way, and we come to believe that God is like this. So I came to it the same way. I was given parents and mentors who raised me in the faith this way. I know that God loves me because other people have loved me and have shown me what that looks like. And that is meant to point to God and show us, oh, that's what these things mean. And then only more so. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I have never stood in the courts of heaven and heard the voice of God pronounce me clean with my own ears. And yet I have faith that this is so, because someone was the right here reality of that to me. And they in turn are acting in faith because they're also not standing on the pavement in the courts of heaven and hearing God say, Tim is clean,
Right.
just go tell him. Right. There's a present reality with which becomes the evidence by which we know that the thing is true.
And I just want to say, not theologizing it, but what I just want to say is that what I like about the way that you're really nailing this first time this concept of faith down is this you've not psychologized faith. We can discuss, have the theological and philosophical. Well, what are the elements of faith? It's fiducia and it's a census, all those sorts of things that theologians do, right? And
And that
what
would
is it?
make a great
Belief of
excursus. Maybe we should at
sure.
some point record one of
Yeah,
those.
and it's fine. I mean, we in other contexts, you and I have had these sorts of conversations about the nature of faith and propositions versus things. That's all fine. But what I think I'm hearing you get at, which I think is probably very much here in the substance, pardon the pun, in Hebrews, is there's a this tangible reality to it. This thing that you guys have experienced. That's, man, you're looking at it. That's faith, man. That's what's gotten you through so far. That's what's going to get you through. It's not this kind of abstract doctrinaire thing. It's almost concrete.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
And
my comment on your comment. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, I can hear in the back of my head a certain portion of the peanut gallery who wants to, okay, now connect that to eternal life and the new birth by
Right.
faith. And I have two things to say about that. The first one is that that's not what we're talking about here, and that's important.
Right.
The second thing is, though, it is real. This is not a different use of the word faith. This is not a use of the word faith that means something else. This is a different use of faith.
Yeah.
These people, but the same thing would be true. We could say the same thing in that context about faith. When I come to trust that Christ saves me, despite everything, despite my theology not being perfect, despite my life not being perfect, despite my logic not being perfect, and maybe being mixed up a little bit on the gospel, in that, like, that famous Alistair Begg sermon, like, the man on the middle cross told me I could come. That's all I know.
Right.
So here I am.
Right.
If that's all you have, okay. So I quit looking to my works to save me. I quit looking to I'm no longer panicky about, but I did a really bad thing when I was 25. I can rest. And that is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
Yep.
It's the same thing.
It's just in different contexts. But in the present context, as you so beautifully laid out at the beginning of this, the particular context is these people have suffered for their faith. They have endured that. And so the authors are pointing them back to that lived experience and saying, what this is experientially and firsthand. That's the reality to which I'm appealing. Again, this isn't merely some sort of theological authority. This is a lived experience that they've had. And I think that anybody who is studying this along with us probably has been a believer long enough they can look back and go, yeah, actually, God was there for me this time. I've experienced this. I know what it's like for God to care for me. I know what it's like to trust in God.
Exactly. And he's going to give them a view, like a quick look at what that's been like through history. And we're going back to Abel.
Okay.
And actually, like, we go back to creation in verse 3 first. By faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God. So the things which are seen are not made of things which are visible. Side note, but worth hanging on to. This is one of my talking point verses when I deal with pagans a lot. The things which are the things which are seen are not made of things which are visible. There is an underlying spiritual reality to the world. They're not wrong about that. And so many modern pagans think of Christianity as sort of antithetical to spirituality. It's this sort of weird obsession. Some guys are out in the car, in the garage, tinkering with a 68 Mustang, and some people are on the internet tinkering with a theology, but it's got nothing to do with life. No, Like we speak directly to spiritual reality.
Yeah.
This is one of those places. Completely side application, nothing to do with our target audience here in the book of Hebrews. But we understand God built all of this to start with. That's the foundation. And that's a good foundation when you're struggling with your current relationship with all of this.
Right.
Not having enough to eat, not having clothes, not having a place to stay.
Yeah. If the things that are visible are not in your favor, well, you can't look to the things that are visible to give you hope. Well, then what are you looking to give you hope? The things that are not visible. Well, guess what? As it turns out.
Yes, that underlies everything.
Right. That makes
So
sense.
then we go straight to Abel. By faith, Abel offered God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it, he being dead still speaks. I'm going to trust that most of our audience is familiar with the story. If not, you can find it in Genesis 4.
Mm-hmm.
But the for our purposes, we're trying to follow the argument here. And so rather than going on an excursus into a deep dive into the Abel story, what I want to point out is this last phrase here. Through it, he being dead still speaks.
Mm.
Abel is telling you something. Like what you should take from Hebrews 11 about Abel is that Abel is telling you something.
Even now, in this moment.
Even now.
Goes back
Right
to
now.
verse 2 about I'm assuming the elders obtaining a good testimony. This is the
Yes.
testimony that he has even now.
Yeah, and it's present. He still speaks. He's right now.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
can hear Abel right now.
Right.
Abel has, you're struggling. And think about who we're writing to here. These are people who are struggling because they've done well
Mm-hmm.
spiritually and they've paid for it. It's been very costly and they're struggling. And what our author is saying is, hey, run over to this, I know you're on the field and you need to stay on the field, but run over here to the sideline for a minute. Abel just came off the bench and he wants to whisper in your ear for a second.
Well, you mean that guy who was murdered? He died?
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
He wants to tell you a little something about this.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't elaborate it really.
Right.
But this is going to build. He's building something through reference to these stories. And he does, the author, the reason I was very comfortable preaching the sermon series I talked about earlier going through here is because I believe the author is setting up exactly that sermon series. Like our authors are inviting us to go back and look at these stories, but they're giving us a grid to look at them through.
Right.
Go read the Abel story, read Genesis 4 with the question in mind, Abel, what are you telling me? Because the author of Hebrews and the Holy Spirit are telling you that he's telling you something.
Mm-hmm. So, you spoilers, you going to tell us what he's telling us now? Or are you going to make us wait till we get to the end?
We'll get to it as we go through. He's here. He's
we're eagerly anticipating.
He's telling you something. And then he rolls immediately into Enoch.
Mm-hmm.
Enoch was taken away and did not see death. He was not found because God took him. He's quoting Genesis 5:24 there. But before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. And now we're going to pause for a little excursus and pay attention to these. Go through, like print out, if you don't highlight in your Bible, print out Hebrews 11 and go through and highlight all the stuff that's not a story reference. Because that's the lattice that you're supposed to, that's the setting that the diamonds are in. And there's something holding all this together that we're supposed to get. So we step out of the story for a second, but without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Now, I submit to you that I'm pretty sure the people he's writing to didn't struggle with the first one of those two conditions.
Right.
We know he's there. Is he actually looking out for me? I'm seeking him. Is he looking out for me? That I'll tell you just for myself, that's been where my struggle's been with this.
Right.
I have never in my life, like, I'm a pastor's kid. I've been through the, like, there's nothing to eat, and somebody knocks on the door and just out of the clear blue sky, hey, I'm driving home from the grocery store and I think God wants me to just like drop off the groceries here and then go back and get stuff from my family. Do you guys need groceries? Like, literally nothing in the cupboards. Been on the receiving end of that, and more than once.
As have I, by the way. Those are fun moments.
Yes, they are. And it's also fun. I've been occasionally on the giving end of that, and that's a great deal of fun.
Yes.
When it when you're just being obedient and it turns out to be exquisitely timed and perfect. But I've never struggled with God's ability to do anything.
Right.
I know some people do. That's never been a struggle for me.
Right.
I have struggled much more with, well, then why isn't he?
Right.
Is he
What?
really, he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Do we believe that he rewards us when we diligently seek him?
I
Because
will
the Exodus
offer.
generation
No,
didn't.
go ahead. You go ahead.
Like, go back to, call back to chapter 3, right? The Exodus generation did not believe that.
Right.
We have been discussing some folks who failed at exactly this point.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, you were going to say something.
No, I was just maybe I'll say friendly pushback. I think it's exactly to your point. But when you say that a lot of us don't struggle with the first clause, if we take that just in the sense of atheism versus if does God exist, or we this is can God do something, I think you're right. Most of us don't, but there might be a biblical sense that we do. Uh, I'll take Psalm 14 as one example. The fool says in his heart, "There is no God," and depending on your interpretation of that passage, which can be contentious. I don't know in my own interpretation of Psalm 14 that we're making a discussion that the fool is the atheist, that there is no God isn't, I don't think, a take on God's non-existence. It's the take of the sense that he's not actually going to be there and do anything about it. So he's not
Uh,
really going to do anything. So if that is something like that is a biblical model of thinking, then it might be the case that to believe God is back in Exodus, God is merciful, gracious. He reveals himself, blah, blah, blah. It might be to the believe that God is to believe that he is the rewarder of those, that he is present. Like he's there with you right now. You feel like he's not, but guess what? He really is. So we may actually struggle with that first part, especially in dark moments.
so a little less like God doesn't exist and a little more like he's not there.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I'm not saying that's definitely what's going on, but I can
Okay.
definitely see how in moments in
Interesting.
my personal life, in moments of trials, it's one thing to acknowledge there is a God out there in the universe. It's a totally different thing to say God is here. And
Mhm.
I wonder if that's more of where his mindset might be.
Interesting.
If
That's a
it's
good question.
if it's not exactly his mindset is, I think it's at least relevant to the argument.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, that's a good thought. So now we go back in. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. So again, notice the bit that's not like the commentary, by which he became heir of the world,
Mm-hmm.
or by which he condemned the world rather, and became heir of the
Condemn the world.
righteousness which is according to faith. He obeys,
Mm-hmm.
and the world drowns, and Noah receives righteousness by believing God. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going.
Hmm.
By faith, he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. Now, the commentary. Like all of this thus far story, right?
Mm-hmm.
For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God.
Right.
Now, this is a thing we wouldn't necessarily know just from reading, Genesis 12
Mm-hmm.
onward, Abraham's story. Abraham is not just looking forward to the time when his descendants multiply and build cities. Abraham is looking forward somehow to a city that God builds.
Yeah.
And we know this side of the writing of Revelation a little more
What
about
that
what that
looks
city
like.
looks like.
Right.
Um, than we would know just reading Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
But this also tells us there's something going on with Abraham. He has either worked out or God has shown him something that's not in either God has shown him something not in the Genesis text,
Mm-hmm.
or he has kind of worked out for himself that the city that we're ultimately looking for is not going to be a city that man builds. It's going to be a
Right.
city God builds.
Right. Right. That makes a ton of sense. I also just can't help but notice the language direct on the Noah section is also here. Noah's divinely word of things not seen. Abraham is not seeing this city. And yet this ties back to our original
Yes.
definition, things not seen. So he
Evidence
doesn't,
of things not seen.
the world's built of things not seen. So again, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing, pardon the pun, the importance of this. That's kind of what faith is for all of these very righteous people, is they have something not seen and they're there living the reality of it anyway, something like that.
Yes. Yeah, which is exactly the kind of life that the recipients of this book are being challenged to live.
Right.
Like Jesus promised a judgment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the clock is running. He said this generation will not pass until he said not one stone's left on another in the temple.
Right.
This generation won't pass until all these things take place. Time is running out on this. Live like it's true. Here's a bunch of other people who lived like it was true, even though they couldn't see it.
Right.
That takes us right to Sarah. By faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, there's a euphemism for you,
Hmm.
were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore.
Right. This is
Now the
another example. This is another example of something that I wouldn't have picked up having reading the Genesis text unless I just overlooked it. Sarah is not especially described as having a strong faith. There's the text about, unless my story is mixed up, Sarah laughs actually, and yet she
yeah,
does go on conceive. And so I guess this is where God is telling us something about Sarah. It's like, no, actually, she trusted me.
well, and think it through. She laughs, and it's really interesting. On my most recent pass through the story, I noticed something that hadn't jumped out at me before. What she says to herself is, "Shall I have pleasure being old?"
Mm.
She
Oh,
doesn't say, "Shall I conceive?"
yeah. Hmm. Yep.
So Sarah, Sarah and Abraham, they're old. Their sex life is over. It can't happen
Right.
anymore. Um, and then God does something, and Abraham is again capable and no longer
Mm-hmm.
as good as dead. Um,
Right.
and Sarah goes with it. God says you're going to have a son. Well, I mean, you have to make love to have the kid. Sarah
Right.
goes with it. That's an act of faith.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
And then it takes a few generations, but the promise that God gave him came true.
Mm-hmm.
As many as the scars, innumerable as the stars, as innumerable as the sand. Now the commentary in 13 to 16, he breaks back into Commentary discussion. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off and were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country out of which they had come, they would have had the opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Abraham had one son who was the son of promise, had Ishmael besides, but had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob and Esau. Abraham doesn't live to see millions of people coming up out of Egypt.
Right.
Right? He doesn't live to see the nation of Israel. He dies not having received what God promised him. He said, to you and to your seed, I'll give this land. And the only piece of it he owns is the cave where his wife is buried.
Right. But this might be part of how he works the problem out, because if God's going to give it to me and my seed and I'm about to die, if he's going to give it to me, there must be something the future for me.
Yes. And not just something in the future for me, but God didn't say, you see how good this is? I'm going to give this to your kids, and I'm going to give you, something out past Pluto.
Right.
Just everywhere the sole of your foot touches is yours.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you this. He dies knowing he's coming back, because he ain't owned it yet. But he's seeking a homeland. He knows that the fulfillment of that is not happening in this life.
Mm-hmm.
And so he lifts his gaze from, this is one of those things you learn when you drive heavier vehicles. I spent 5 years as a school bus driver.
Oh.
You have to look further down the road than you do when you're driving a Celica. Because it takes you a lot longer to stop. Harder to change lanes. It's
right.
You pick your eyes up and you look. If I can, one of my instructors was like, listen, here's the deal. If you can see it, you should be thinking about it already. If it doesn't matter if it's a mile down the road, if you can see it, start planning. What our authors are doing is our audience is like nose to the grindstone, and they've done it, but they're getting tired, and they're grabbing their chins and like look further down the road. So now we're not just looking back.
Looking forward.
We're looking forward. They desire a better, that is a heavenly country. Abraham, looking back, we see Abraham looking forward. So look forward.
There does seem to be an implicit warning in 15. There is this possibility of returning to what they had come out of in 15. Abraham could have gone back to Ur, and Noah could have not built the ark because he got tired, and Abel could have put up with the bullying and stopped with the sacrifice. I mean, you can do all those sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
They could have gone back.
And they didn't.
And I guess that's the implicit encouragement. If you have this eternal perspective, so they had this eternal perspective, which is what faith is something like. It's this eternal perspective. And so you guys have this as well, so that when you're stuck here at the grindstone, you can lift your eyes higher and see beyond your present sufferings.
Yep. And notice how this has grown from Abel's telling you something to Abraham's waiting for a city whose builder and maker is God. to all these people desire a heavenly country, and God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So not only was Abraham looking for that, but God is doing that. And now still on Abraham. Spend a lot of time with Abraham here. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. So we get this little look into Abraham's psychology. What is he thinking going up the mountain? He's thinking, well, God made it very, very clear that it's not Ishmael, it's Isaac. And he didn't just say it's going to be somebody from your own body. He said it's going to be Isaac.
Right.
And then he said, take him up to the top of Mount Moriah and make him a sacrifice. So I guess he's going to raise him from the dead. So Abraham is making his calculations, doing his planning, and thinking, what does it mean that God has promised this? Well, I guess I'm going to get to see a resurrection. And
I don't know if that ad keeps coming through for you. I apologize if it does.
Yeah, it does. That's all right. No worries.
Go ahead.
So then we move to Isaac. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. So we go back and look. We're not going to do this, but go back and look at Isaac's blessing on Jacob and on Esau, and how he blesses them into the future. He's looking forward. So again, we look back at Isaac to find him looking forward. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. This is a fun little phrase, this on top of his staff. That's a reminder. Why is he leaning on the top of his staff?
Because he's old.
Not just.
No?
Because he's crippled, remember?
Oh, crippled. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, yeah, he's also old, but he fought the angel of the Lord.
That's right.
And the angel of the Lord cheated.
Right.
Which tells you something about Jacob as a fighter.
Right.
and now he goes everywhere with a stick. This is important because there's something about his relationship with his sons that happens here. When he crosses over the brook at dawn, it says that, like, now he's limping, he's leaning on his staff. And the sun rises behind him. Sun's a symbol of rule. So the symbol of rulership is shining on him. And from here on out, he doesn't go out with the flocks. His sons do that. That's why he's got to send Joseph out.
Right.
He no longer has the direct ability to go and do it himself. He has to rule and delegate to his sons. God graduates him into that by crippling it. And we know he was a tough cookie because when he meets Pharaoh, the way he introduces himself is, these are my flocks and my herds, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. He is no slouch.
Which also, I suddenly am imagining Clint Eastwood in his prime playing Jacob.
Yeah, and that's what you should be thinking of. And now think of the fact that he's scared enough of Laban that he bails in the middle of the night, and he's scared of Esau. Like, Jacob is tough. You would not want to fight with Jacob. Think about what Laban and Esau are like, that he's scared of him.
Yeah.
We tend to have Jacob as this sort of lily-livered. No, sure. He's really rough, but Esau is like Genghis Khan.
Sure. I hadn't thought about that,
So
but yeah, I see that. It's clear.
so Joseph, then Jacob blesses the sons of Joseph, remember? And
Mhm.
crosses his hands. So
Crosses his hands, right?
Joseph brings them, no, arranging so the older son will be on the right and the on Jacob's right, and then Jacob, like, he missed it with his dad missed it with him, and mom had to do a little cheating to get
Hmm.
it to come out the way that God told them it was going to come out. But Jacob he's with the program, so he knows
Hmm.
what Joseph is going to do, and he's like, right. So
Yep.
and then Joseph, also looking forward, when he's dying, he makes them, says, when you go up out of here, take my bones with you and bury me in the land of my fathers. He's looking forward. He knows that's going to happen. And God told Abraham it was going to be 400 years. He knows he's not going to live to see it. But he knows it's going to happen. And so he gives the appropriate instructions. He's living like it's going to happen
Right.
because it will. Moses, so by faith, Moses, when he was born, because they saw that he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's command, by faith, or was hidden 3 months by his parents. Sorry, I skipped that bit. Because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's command. By faith, Moses, when he came of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. This is an interesting phrase, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's unpack that, because that's like, how, say, what? Why are you bringing the reproach of Christ into this when this is the life of Moses? Right.
It is. What does Moses know? Well, his nursemaid was a Hebrew woman, a Levite, so we presume he knows the stories of his people.
Right.
Um, okay, so he knows how sin entered the world. He knows that the first thing God said once the confession was on the table, such as it was, um, is that there's going to be a rematch, and the seed of the woman is going to crush
Right.
the head of the seed of the serpent. We
Right.
know that he knows that God told Abraham that he was his chosen vessel, that in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed.
Right.
He knows all that. Um, he knows which side he's supposed to be on. Do I side with the grandson of Ham who settled Egypt, or do
Hmm.
I side with the people of Abraham who are my people?
Right.
And he chooses the reproach of the Messiah.
The Messiah. Right. He doesn't know the name Jesus of Nazareth, knows nothing about the specifics, but he knows the Messiah is going to come. He knows that God is going to redeem his people. He knows he's going to redeem, and so he's still trusting long far off the promises of God.
These are the people of God. I'm with the people of God.
Right.
He chooses to be with the people of God rather than with the idolaters of Egypt.
And that's probably you could probably spend easily an entire sermon just on that notion. The idea of being with the people of God is probably deeply tied with at least faith in the sense, in the application that the author of Hebrews is making it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah, that is very much at the heart of what he's doing here. And it says he looked to the reward. What reward is he looking to? Not sure that we have a great answer for that question in terms of what Moses knows at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But other than, like, God made promises to Abraham, and he wants to be, he's going to be with Abraham's people and reap those promises. Those who bless you will be blessed. Those who curse you will be cursed. and you, all the families of the earth, will be blessed. He's looking to that, and he's like, I'm going to be with these people.
Yeah, the closest verse that comes to mind when I think about the reward, and the last time I taught through Hebrews, I think I referenced it, was in, I forget the chapter. I think it's just after where Abraham delivers Lot, and he rejects any of the gifts of the king for all the obvious reasons, and then God appears to him. So this might be the beginning of 15. God appears to him and says, I am your shield, I am your great reward. And I
Yes.
wonder if the reward there is tying this back to this idea of a city. How much Moses knows, I don't know, but if he's writing the Pentateuch, so he's clearly thought these things through. I wonder if the reward for him is something like the very presence of God in this people he's building, in this city that he's going to establish, something like that.
Something like that. And like, my question there is, like, we're still at the front edge of his life. How much of that
Right.
has he put together yet?
Right. Right.
Um,
Not that much, I would strongly
well,
suspect.
yeah. Although, like, I had a prof in seminary who argued, I think effectively, that the Pentateuch, well, at least Genesis, is
I'm going
composed
to
as
change a website so that I don't know that ad is coming up, but keep talking. I'm going to pull up a different website
sure.
so the ad didn't keep popping up. Go ahead.
That Genesis is Moses apologetic for leaving Egypt, for Israel leaving Egypt,
Ah,
is written to Israel. Here's why we should go. Here's what God is doing. This is why. Um, and wouldn't it be fun to get to heaven and find out that Moses, the prince of Egypt, wrote that before he killed that Egyptian?
right.
And then, like, nobody listened. And then 40 years later, he's putting it back in play.
Right.
I don't, theological science fiction,
How much did
but
they know when they knew it?
yes, going back to the text 27, by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. So we're back to that unseen thing again. But now, not just seeing things not seen, but as seeing him who is invisible.
Yeah.
He endured like he's seeing God.
Yeah.
This is going to be important. We're going to talk about looking to Jesus here. So by faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians attempting to do so were drowned. So we come to the conclusion of the Moses portion. And in all of this, notice Moses is a particularly good example of this, although Abraham furnishes some good examples too. There's lots of opportunities to quit here.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that there are some times that he felt like quitting.
Mm-hmm.
He goes back to God and goes, what am I supposed to do with these people? Like, it's not that he never thought about quitting, but he just
Mm-hmm.
didn't.
Right.
He
Well,
did
and it
what
was
God.
precisely in his faith that he doesn't quit. I mean, I realize that's
Yes.
just restating the point, but that is the point, is he could have quit, but to press on, that was what it meant for them to have faith.
Yes. Believe the promises and therefore live in light of them. So then we pick up the pace here. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. Which is interesting. There's no particular promise. Well, I mean, there is a sort of promise to her. The promise to her is you're going down, right?
Right.
The inhabitants of the land all know God just sacked Egypt, and the people he used to do it are now just on the other side of the Jordan, and they're headed your way. And she goes, well, okay, God's thrown me an opportunity to get on the right side of this one. Let's do it. And she does,
Right.
which also just important. She's not a member of the club,
Right.
right? She's an outsider's outsider. She's not just a Canaanite, although she certainly is that. She's also a whore.
Yeah.
Um, there's every reason for her to be excluded. And yet, by faith, she's included.
It's a strong argument. The way you join God's people is by faith and not by anything else, right?
Mm-hmm. And now we like, and now we hit the etc. portion.
Mm-hmm.
What more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, and also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword. Out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of aliens. Women received their dead to life again. Stop right there. This all sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the Abel bit in the beginning.
Right.
He got murdered, but everything else sounds pretty good. And now it goes horribly wrong. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection.
Mm.
Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, and of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was unworthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, in dens and caves of the earth.
Mm. Yeah. So even in all the tough moments.
Yeah, it's not, and this is really important for the audience he's talking to. So we look back at the people that we are inclined to look back at, and we see all them looking forward to promises they didn't receive in their lifetime.
Mm.
And others got far less than these people that we would look to did, right?
Right.
As we look back to Abraham, we look back to Moses and the great victories. But there's also the Jeremiahs getting sawn in half, and the Isaiahs who are like called to a ministry of failure.
Right.
Right. The missions conference verse, whom shall I send and who will go for us? And Isaiah said, here am I, send me. And no one ever keeps reading at the missions conference. Because the next verse is go and make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy.
Sure. Yeah.
What God says once he says, pick me, I'll do it, is God says, go bore them to death with the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, how long have I got to do that? And God says, until I empty all the houses, until I make the land desolate. Can you imagine? Like you're an evangelist and he's told you in advance you're going to fail.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I think it's a phenomenally good point that faith doesn't always. So, what does success look like? Faith assumes that faith that means that God's going to meet all of my needs. Well, maybe, but not in the sense that you're necessarily thinking, because faith might lead to what looks like failure. The question is, were you faithful in that process? Because if God lets you suffer that, He has something He's bringing out of it, right?
Well, yes. I mean, physical security is a need. It's not just you need to not be sawn in half, right?
Right.
Well, tell it to Jeremiah.
Right.
As the saw is going through his intestines, like, I don't feel like my needs are being met. Well, yeah.
But that's exactly the point. It's
Yes.
in this moment, he's like, no, but this is, I'm trusting in God because even this is going to result in a testimony of some sort. That's still that looking towards the unseen.
Yes. And the magical phrase here is at the beginning of 39, and all these
Yeah.
having obtained a good testimony through faith
Yeah.
did not receive the promise. So, and this, we miss this because we're not living under the weight of a prophecy in the same way that the original readers of this chapter are. Jesus said, this generation doesn't pass until these things take place. They know judgment is going to fall on Jerusalem. The clock is running down. There's not a lot left on it. And when you're living like that, there's, I imagine, a great tendency to like initially like, okay, don't cast, live with confidence because I know it's happening. But a
Right.
few decades have gone by and it hasn't happened yet. And I'm getting tired.
Right.
Yeah, I know God promised it, but man, where is it?
Right.
And maybe I'm getting up there in years and I had my hopes pinned on like this is going to happen and I'm going to see it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm beginning to realize I may die without getting to see that.
Right.
I may, like, the persecution keeps getting more severe. They may kill me
Mm-hmm.
before I get to see that.
Yeah, you may actually die in this.
And if I had my hope pinned on, I know this prophecy is going to come to pass, and like the picture in my head is like, you guys are all laughing at me now, but
Mm-hmm.
at some point, I'm going to be like, ha, how do you like me now? And that's what's been keeping me going. The realization that I may not get that.
Right.
I may not live to see that moment. Even though this is a time-bound prophecy, I may
Mm-hmm.
not live to, James didn't live to see that moment,
Right.
right? Herod killed him. Stephen didn't live to see that moment. And maybe I won't either. And what the authors are saying to them is it doesn't matter. All these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. They didn't get everything that they were looking forward to. Now, what kind of God does that? That sounds, if we stop the chapter right there, that just sounds terrible, right?
Right.
So let me direct your attention. You're keeping good company. Here's all the heroes of the faith who also had it just as bad as you.
Yeah.
Like who, like that. I don't, like, I don't feel better.
Right. And they all
Turns out,
died. The thing you're all worried about dying. By the way, yeah, every single one of them, they all died. So
yes, except Enoch.
yeah. Except for him.
Um, but all these people were looking forward to something that even the Abrahams and the Moses, the people I might point at if I'm doing more of a prosperity gospel thing,
Mm-hmm.
didn't really get what they were looking forward to.
Right.
And some of these guys got sawn in half. So, like, but even the winners, right, didn't really get what they were looking forward to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the payoff, God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us.
Mm.
So, what is God telling Abraham in AD, wherever we are here, 65, when Abraham's like, hey, like, love it here. Heaven is, well, it's heaven. But,
Mm-hmm.
but you know that property that you promised me? When are you going to deliver on that, man? Because it's been a minute.
Right.
And the Messiah's come and everything. Like, what are you waiting for? What God says to these people, these struggling believers who are struggling for perseverance, is that what God is telling Abraham right now is you wait because these people are part of it. and you're waiting for them. You don't get what I promised you until I get all of them together.
I'm not serving the dinner party until all the guests have arrived.
Yes, we're still gathering the guests. God, they didn't get what they're looking forward to because God is making them wait for us to be seated.
And by
And all
extension, we should say the same thing about if someone says, why would is the invitation to say the same thing for ourselves when we're struggling as well, not
right.
receiving what we're waiting on.
Well, Abraham was 2,000 years before the people who got to read this letter.
Right.
These people who read this letter have been waiting for 2,000 years
For us.
to get their bit.
Right.
They're waiting for us. And depending on how long the Lord tarries, we may wait for other people.
Right.
We get a chance to be part of this. The things that they looked forward to. And so this is like all the way back to Abel. What's Abel telling you? Abel is telling you it's worth it. We're waiting for you. Don't give up. Like, this is going to be worth it.
Yeah.
Just keep going.
You can get smashed in the head with a rock and die by your brother, and it's okay because it's worth it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And so all of this, like, it's not just a quick and dirty review of Old Testament history, although it works pretty well for that.
Sure.
It's let's review. These are your people.
Mm-hmm.
And not just these are your people in the, like, these are the, the way a middle schooler playing basketball looks up to Michael Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
If you can imagine this, like, they're refusing to give Michael Jordan the trophy because they're going to give the trophy to all the good basketball players at once, and they're making him wait until this middle schooler gets done doing his thing because he's going to be part of it.
Yeah.
Like, that's what's happening. It's not just emulate these people, although there is that. These people are waiting for you.
Yeah.
They are looking forward to you joining them. God is making them wait so that you can join them. So don't screw it up.
Stay strong. Well, if I can bookend this way back at verse 1 and tell me if this is an overreading of the text. I think this is well in the point. So we take this whole thing back to his original point he was building on. So faith for you guys, who we said in chapter 10, the just live by faith, right? You're going through all these things. The substance of what you're hoping for, which is not merely a source. I know you want physical deliverance, but what you're actually wanting is not merely physical deliverance. What you're not seeing is not merely the deliverance in this life. What you're waiting for is Christ's return and our redemption and the resurrection. This is what we're waiting for. So hold on to that and in that to your original, but this tangible kind of moment now. If you face this stuff with confidence right now, knowing that everybody has done it before and people do it after you, so that we're all going to sit down at this party together and we're all like, we've finally made it. The resurrection is here. Jesus is back, which should give me the confidence to go through whatever the garbage is I'm going through right now. And it's just okay.
Yes. And we will in due time be seated at that table. But in between now and then, the thing to do is know that you're going to be seated at that table and live like the person that God can seat at that table.
Right. Going to Big Brother Jesus every chance that you need to, which is all the time.
Yes, all of the 10 chapters that he's dumped into what it looks like
Right.
to get the help that you need to be that person.
Right. So closing thought for me anyway, and I realize we still have two more chapters to go to finish the book, but this is a particularly encouraging chapter. Any thoughts as to why people read Hebrews and it terrifies them? It's not a terrifying book, Tim. It is, but it's not, right?
No, it's a tremendously encouraging book, but it's the same kind of thing. Certain books acquire a reputation that they don't deserve.
Right.
People talk about my favorite example of this is Ecclesiastes. People talk
Right.
about how depressing Ecclesiastes is, and it really
Right.
like as when you really grasp it, no, it isn't.
Right.
It's a manual on how to enjoy life without
Absolutely.
idolizing thing.
Yeah.
Um,
It's liberating. Yeah.
it's so freeing, and you can enjoy life if you take the messages of Ecclesiastes to heart. You can enjoy life so much better.
Mhm.
Hebrews is similar. It's because people have misread a couple of key passages, 6, 10, like that, um, and have taken them to be about something that they're not. Then it becomes this terrifying, if you're not in every way perfect, perhaps you're going to hell kind of situation.
Right.
But reading it with attention, that's just not what it's about.
Mm-mm.
And it should be terrifying. I was writing back and forth with a friend who has presented, working her way through Hebrews, I believe, in a church Bible study or something, was presenting some of this and had the reaction of a bunch of people being kind of terrified
Mhm.
at Hebrews 6, I believe it was. And my response was great. They're supposed to be. But what they're scared of is important here.
Right.
What you should be terrified of is falling down on the job.
Right.
Because God does actually discipline his children.
Right.
He isn't just sitting in heaven and gonna let that go. Just as he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him, he also disciplines his children.
Precisely because he's building this city of people who are going to be fit to sit at this table.
Yes. And he, to borrow a phrase from C.S. Lewis, laid in Mere Christianity, God is using this life to fit you for eternity, and he doesn't care what it costs him or what it costs you. You know,
Right.
so you may be tremendously unhappy with your lot in life. That's neither here nor there.
Right.
He is your eternal bliss is on his mind, but what it costs you right now, in the same way that your track coach like does not care if you're living your best life now when you're on your third wind sprint, like doesn't matter. He's aiming to put you on that podium,
Right.
with a medal, and if that means that right now you periodically puke in the trash can, he's fine with it.
Right. He might push you till you do it on purpose.
Yes.
I had a weightlifting coach who would do that. He put 30 pounds on me, but the way he did it was he lifted me. He made me lift until I would go to the bathroom. I would vomit, and then I would come back and he would make me finish the set.
Yep.
And there may be people, oh, that's too harsh. Maybe he put 30 pounds on me.
Well, yeah, it's hard to argue with the results. There's ways of doing that are just ineffective and stupid.
Right.
And then there's ways of doing that actually get results. And it's hard to argue with results.
Right. And I guess that's what we would say to God is we have to trust that he knows what he's doing. He knows the results that he's getting. Well, I mean, look at the testament we just read. It's hard to argue the results. I mean, look at the life of Noah and Abraham and Enoch and all the rest, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, very encouraging. Any final thoughts here? We've been going about an hour and a half. Any final thoughts here? I think this has, for me, been one of the most encouraging. Certainly, they've all been interesting. This is one of the most encouraging chapters. This should be for the Hall of Faith, I think.
It really is. Well, the only thing I would tag onto it is it's interesting. We've we've had a whole chapter and barely talked about Jesus.
Uh-huh.
There's that one reference to the reproach of
Right.
Christ with Moses, but other than that, we haven't really said anything about Jesus. And that's where he's going next. It's like
That's so
we're
much fun.
like, if you're going to talk about, who do we look at as we're
Right.
trying to navigate this problem? We've talked about everybody but Jesus. Surely there's a Jesus thing in here somewhere. Well, yes,
Right.
there is.
Well, yeah,
That's
to
where
this
we're
point,
at.
we've been talking about what faith can bring, but of course, as Christians, the object of our faith is Jesus. And so I guess the burning question is, at this point, you've persuaded me, dear authors, that I need to trust God for the promises. What does that look like? So I guess Jesus is going to be the answer, is what that looks like coming up.
Yep, that's where we go in chapter 12.
Excellent. Well, we will do chapter 12 next time. In the meantime, questions, comments, cries of outrage in the video below. Tim, we're getting very near the end of the book. So this has been a phenomenal study. We'll come back next time and do, are we going to do all of chapter 12 or do you know? Do you have that planned yet?
I am not sure. We might need to break that into two, but we'll see.
Sure.
We'll
We'll
kind
see
of
where it goes. All right. Well, then, until that happens, and obviously I had to change my screen. Technology is great, except when it's not, but I'm glad we're able to do this way. So until we see you guys again, may God richly bless you.